You're listening to Homeschool Connections, brought to you by the Homeschool Research Lab at the Johns Hopkins School of Education, Institute for Education Policy. The Homeschool Research Lab aims to inform and influence evidence-based education policy by expanding access to homeschool data and conducting high-quality research. Through our Homeschool Hub and diverse collaborative efforts, we provide unbiased information, share rigorous academic studies, and translate findings into actionable policy insights that can ultimately benefit all students, including those that are homeschooled. I'm Christy Batts, a research fellow for the lab. In each episode, we'll dive into the latest research, data, and insights surrounding homeschooling. We'll dispel myths, inform stakeholders, and advance evidence-driven discussions. Today, we have with us Brenda Rosa, founder of the Homeschool Clinic, a national organization that mentors leaders and edupreneurs with homeschooling and adjacent education models, specifically within the Brown and Black communities. She is the author of A Truly Latino Education, a framework that highlights the strengths and resources of the Latino homeschooling community. And Brenda has homeschooled her own three for nearly 20 years, and she's based in Arizona. Welcome, Brenda.
Thank you for having me, Christy. I'm so excited to be here. I really appreciate it. This opportunity to talk homeschooling, right? And other things that are going on now as a result of the post-pandemic world.
I'm so glad that you brought up the pandemic. Did that play a role in shifting you into becoming a leader in your community?
Before the pandemic, everybody knew that I was like that homeschooling mom. It was one of those things that we really didn't talk about all that much because we felt like we were the outliers and nobody around us was homeschooling. And the individuals that we knew of, they certainly were not Black and brown. I think to a certain extent, we believed the stereotype that homeschooling is only something that white conservative folks do. So we were doing our thing and the world shut down. And that's when we realized that homeschooling wasn't as limited as we thought it was. Everybody has this idea that homeschooling is you stay at home all day long and you're socially isolated and you don't go anywhere. And then we all found out during the pandemic just how active we had been. Homeschooling is not being sequestered at home all day long. So, of course, what was going on is that people were like on Facebook and these local groups saying, oh, I have to start homeschooling because I just found out that my kid's school closed and what am I going to do? Does anyone have any helpful tips or resources? And so what started happening was that my local friends said, know somebody who can help you with this. I kept getting tagged in all these different Facebook posts. And so I would answer questions. And that's kind of how it started. And so at one point, I had been asked the same questions over and over again. I can't keep copying and pasting. So let me just throw up like this little super quick video, like a minute or two. And I'm just going to say, guys, relax, take a breather. And this is what you're going to do right now, because your kid is starting homeschool tomorrow. We're going to do this. Step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4. And that's how that kind of started. So that video went in a lot of different directions and it started becoming really popular. And I started seeing that other people, complete strangers, were sharing this. Around the same time, there was a lot of interest kind of nationwide. And of course, I was jazzed to change the narrative that homeschooling looks this way. And maybe what if somebody sees our video and says, well, they look like me. Maybe I can do that too. Because representation matters. So long story short, things started kind of happening. During the pandemic, people were beginning to feel super isolated. There were social things that were going on at the time. And even after the pandemic, we had great civil unrest with lots of racial divide. My Black sisters and my brown sisters were terrified that the world was just not safe for their kids. They were worried about gun violence. They were worried about injustice. They were worried about being targeted because of the color of their skin. And so as a Hispanic person, a Latina, I know that fear. And over time, I realized our community has a really different set of needs, and we need to look out for ourselves. And then I began to think about how this is what we've always done. And where did we lose it? When did we stop trusting in ourselves? When did we start feeling like everyone else was an expert? When did we start allowing other people to tell us how to feel about these things, how to raise our own children? No one had the right to tell us that we should feel unsafe, or you should feel safe because this doesn't apply to you. And so that was really where this conversation started. So it was way beyond homeschooling into a sisterhood that started kind of developing behind the scenes through Facebook messages. So of course, as Latinos talk, we just do, hey, can I include my friend? And these women were also dealing with a lot of the same concerns in their groups. But the way that we have understood homeschooling just really doesn't apply to our community. Sure, there's a lot of overlap, but our community has specific needs. We have specific viewpoints. We define education in a very unique way that is not necessarily aligned with other groups. And that's okay, because we don't have to all be the same, but we were speaking the same language and other people weren't. So these fine ladies eventually grew into what we call now as Latinos homeschooling. And that's how that conversation started. So we got together, we began talking. That film that we made started kind of going around. I knew a lot at that point in time because I had been helping develop leaders nationwide. I had so many decades, 20 years of homeschooling under my belt to begin with. Then having had a background in public education and private education. And that's how this happened. That's how the Homeschool Clinic was born. I did house calls and online calls to families who needed one-on-one assistance. And that's how that whole thing just grew. The next thing I know, I'm speaking everywhere and people want to hear about this. It isn't anything that I would say has anything to do with me. I think it has more to do with my willingness to serve and to help and to try to bridge a gap. There's a lot of division as well. Part of my job is to heal that division and also encourage my own people to find their strengths. And I think this is where my work applies to other groups. And one of the things that I learned was just how similar the Black community defines education and the goals of education. And I don't mean to speak for them, but one of the things that they did convey was that they also had a concern for not just their own children, but they were interested in protecting and educating and raising up children as a community. We're very concerned about the community. And there was so much overlap between what our Black sisters were saying and what the Latina sisters were saying. And we were saying, yeah, that's a thing. So when I'm talking about this, it isn't just about homeschooling, because that's not what this is about. This is about raising up a future generation to believe in themselves. This is about protecting my sister's children, helping my sisters feel more confident, pointing them towards their own greatness, reminding them that their parents didn't come to this country to just kind of have them waste an opportunity, that we owe our ancestors and we need to be good ancestors to our children. And so beautiful to see that same sentiment in the Black community. Latino homeschooling isn't just about diversity of language and adding Latino history and Mexican American history to the curriculum, because that's not what Latino homeschooling is. So Latino homeschooling looks at the strength of the individual, the strength of the family, and the strength of the community. We value our stories. We focus on education of the whole child. We teach our children how to respect elders. And for many, many children, we teach them in Spanish and in English. But that's because our children have traditionally had to bridge the gap between their parents and the rest of society. So we also have to raise up these great communicators as well. So it's not just about adding Spanish to the curriculum. Latino homeschooling is about raising whole, confident children. It is about being on the shoulders of great people before us and understanding that responsibility towards ourselves and not allowing the experiences of our ancestors to be wasted and disrespected by not honoring them. So that is Latino homeschooling in a nutshell. I think it isn't just about our community either, right? It is about many other communities who have been marginalized. It is about developing leaders from within. If we want to strengthen Latinos as a whole, the leadership is going to come from Latinos. Too often, we feel this pressure to homeschool like everyone else, to like look like everyone else. And that stuff doesn't work for a lot of us. And so one of the things that I have begun to say is Latino homeschooling starts off by no longer apologizing. So how did I become a leader? I don't really know. I just know that somewhere along the lines, there weren't a whole lot of people maybe feeling confident enough to be able to speak up and say, this is what this is and this is what we need. And I'm here, I guess, because I was willing.
Thank you for giving such a full understanding of where you were, how your journey has progressed, and where you are now, and also in the context of the larger Latina homeschooling community, and even in context with other homeschooling communities as well. From your perspective, or what you've heard from your Latina sisters, what is the Hispanic Latino homeschool community's greatest needs right now?
So the first thing is, in order to know what we're able to do, we need to know who we are. We need to know where we are. We need to know how many of us there are. It would be helpful to have basic information. But as it is, the homeschooling community in general is super hesitant to share any information. And then add the additional challenge of many homeschoolers who are Latino. Oftentimes, many people in our community are leery, but even more so, those individuals in the community who may have some challenges. And that is a need and a challenge that is specific, right, to the Latino community. And that's not to say that other communities don't struggle in that way. I'm just saying that we've got that issue and that fear. So one of the biggest needs that I've shared before is that we need research. But you have done an incredible job with that. Johns Hopkins has led the way in research, but there's still so much more that we need to know in order to help. So I would say that there is still there's a great need for research. We need data. We need the numbers to try to figure out what it is that we have and how big this actually is. But numbers, right? You may have them. So if you were to ask me what we need more people like you.
I hear your charge, Brenda.
Just so you know.
Challenge accepted.
Just so you know, I'm not even really sure if opportunities like this would be possible had we not had people in the homeschooling community that really care about not just the homeschooling community at large, but also the more marginalized groups within the homeschooling community. So
Yeah.
there is definitely still a need for research. And, the second thing that we are really in need of as a community is an increased sense of awareness. And one of the things that I appreciate about having attended the last Johns Hopkins Community Advisory Panel meeting was the fact that you were able to show that the homeschooling community is just growing. There are a whole lot of us out there. I was actually surprised at the number of homeschoolers and the projected number of Latino homeschoolers. And I don't think the community knows just how many of us there are. In other words, they need to know that they're not alone, and the data will help us demonstrate that. So going back to that first need. So that second need would be that increased awareness. There are more of us than you think there are. In terms of needs, one of the things that I have spoken about with other national homeschooling leaders is there is a need for leadership within the Latino homeschooling community. Because at this point in time, there are so few of us. There are so many people that are so talented within my community, but haven't really been given that opportunity and that chance. Again, they don't know that we're there. And so there is a need for leadership for mentorship, and then, of course, funding.
This is a good segue. I'm going to repeat a phrase I've heard you say before, but if I get it wrong, please correct me. So I've heard you say that homeschooling is the great equalizer and ESAs are the great accelerator. So I just want to give you a chance to expound on this.
Sure. So for a long time, I think we've grown accustomed to reading all the really feel good reports about educational outcomes and the fantastic results of homeschooling. And I love that we've got homeschool scholarship and homeschoolers are successful. But what I haven't loved is that homeschooling is not something still that is not accessible to a lot of families, and that is simply because of financial reasons. A lot of homeschoolers of color live in single family households. Lots of homeschoolers of color, if they do have two people in the home, it's a two-income household just to make ends meet. There are higher poverty rates. And for many of my brothers and sisters, homeschooling is a luxury and a privilege and something that they associate with affluence and something that is outside of their reach, not practical. So I was fortunate enough to find a way to homeschool my children. It was a huge financial sacrifice for my family. I worked full time up until my oldest child was in the third grade. And even then, I worked from home, always trying to make ends meet. And homeschooling was a challenge, being able to buy curriculum. So we never bought anything. And when we did, it was a used book. We simply didn't have the resources. Half the time, we didn't have internet. We just couldn't keep up financially. And everybody would say, well, it's a luxury and it's a privilege. And what I saw was even in the meager things we were able to do, my kids were excelling. And that's when I realized my kids have access to these amazing educational outcomes and also these other outcomes that we are aware of now, right? Like homeschoolers are more engaged citizens. I mean, all of these amazing outcomes for these kids, and homeschooling gives the opportunity to any child, right? Any child who's homeschooled. And homeschooling is the great equalizer because homeschooling doesn't care if you're rich, if you're poor, if you're in a single parent household. It doesn't care. The outcomes are pretty much the same. And in that regard, homeschooling was the great equalizer, leveling the playing field for my children and many, many children of color who would have possibly ended up being relegated into a system that would not allow them to reach their full potential. So a lot of people have this idea that homeschooling is for rich folks and people with privilege, and that homeschooling is a privilege. And I can see in one sense what they're saying, but what I can say is that homeschooling has the capability of leveling the playing field for kids. It's the one-on-one attention, the low teacher-student ratio. It is self-directed learning. All of these things that we look for in the most affluent of private schools and the really good, well-performing public schools, we can have that on a much smaller scale. It's much easier to attain. And then you provide that in the context in a loving environment led by the people that know that child the best. And so, yeah, that's why I say homeschooling is the great equalizer, because given the opportunity, any child can have fantastic educational outcomes if they have the ability to be homeschooled. Now, of course, the biggest reason that I hear over and over again as to why, especially pre-pandemic, why people didn't homeschool was just financial. I'm a single mom, I can't homeschool. I'm a single mom, I cannot afford expensive curriculum, really struggling to make ends meet. To begin with, I wish that I could do all of those things, but I've got to work two jobs. And I get that because I've been there and I get it. I definitely once was one of those homeschoolers. And so for a long time in the state of Arizona, because Arizona is where I am, and Arizona definitely leads the way in terms of like school choice and options. But for a long time, ESA, so the Empowerment Scholarship account in Arizona, was only available to children with special needs and children who had a documented disability. And that went on for, I want to say it's probably about 10 years or so. And just a few short years ago, Arizona became one of the only states with universal ESA. Now, you would think that a lot of families would have been super excited about that, but the first ones to kind of panic were the traditionally homeschooling families. And I know because I definitely felt some kind of way about ESAs until I said, wonder. So I applied, really didn't tell anybody, kept my opinions to myself because I wasn't going to tell on myself. I was this traditional homeschooler. Yeah. Is that going to the dark side, so to speak, right? It was something that people were just like, yeah, I'm gonna take government funds because you know how homeschoolers feel about government funding, regulation, right? Oversight, okay, rights infringement. And I understood that. But I also understood that the state of Arizona and my current government was really about making sure that my kids have the best possible choices. We're a state that's big on parent choice and parent involvement, which there's probably a lot of other states that are not like that. And so we applied and we were given ESA and we never looked back. So ESA has changed the way we homeschool. I am able to provide a world-class, high-quality education because I have everything I need. Imagine having access to everything you need to educate your children at home. Let's be open here to a possibility. If you are a homeschool advocate and you are pro-homeschool, would you not want that same opportunity for everyone? I say homeschooling is the great equalizer. Homeschooling produces incredible outcomes, but ESA is a vehicle to accelerate those outcomes and then further level that playing field, especially for children who are Black and brown children. My plea to other homeschooling leaders is we share a vision of children being at home with their parents, but many potential homeschooling families will never get there. They'll never become homeschooling families because they could never afford it. So that's why I say that homeschooling is that great equalizer. But ESA is going to cut through all of the red tape. Now, I'm not saying it's going to eliminate every single problem, but I am saying that financial consideration is a huge reason why people do not homeschool and never consider it because they say we cannot afford it. We live in incredible times. What's going on right now in the Latino homeschool movement is almost our own, it's our civil rights era. We are beginning to demand our rights as whole human beings. And one of the ways that we do that is to demand that right to homeschool our own children in our way.
I was thinking about if you've already seen an acceptance of the ESAs in your community, but
Right.
if that's something that the national Latina homeschool community also talks about, is the opportunities to have an ESA in the same way that Arizona does.
So the Latino homeschooling community at large is barely getting up to speed as to basic knowledge of homeschooling. I think many people still believe, even to this point, that homeschooling is something that's not allowed. We still have that going on. And that's because we're a couple of steps behind the general homeschooling community because of the challenges and the social barriers that we've had historically. So my grandmother, for example, didn't speak English. So when my mom was born stateside, my mom struggled to learn English because her first language is Spanish. Now, I was born in California, but I spoke English, but my father hardly spoke any English. So it took us a couple generations just to be able to speak English, much less get into all these fancy options. They just kind of did what the government told them to do. That's the school on the corner. That's where your daughter's going. We were good to go until we realized a couple generations later, this is not going to work for my kids. And maybe it did work for me, maybe marginally, but that's kind of where we were. But I'm not there anymore. My children hardly speak Spanish. We're dealing with new challenges, new barriers. So in our community, I feel like we're still getting everyone up to speed. And then there are some of us who are aware of ESA options.
Yeah.
So I would say that number is definitely lower in the Latino homeschooling community. So when I hear a Latina tell me, a mom say, hey, I heard you talking about homeschooling your kids and I would love, but I can't afford it. And you see, I don't have to make that whole argument about how, well, this is what homeschooling is and this is what homeschooling isn't. We'll get to that a little bit later. But did you know that in the state of Arizona, we have this thing called the Empowerment Scholarship Account? This is going to give you everything you need to make the right choices for your child. So the ones that I've spoken to, there's lots of them. I'm not a researcher, so I don't have the numbers. And so many people do not know about ESA. So whereas a lot of my work initially in the homeschool clinic was increasing homeschool awareness and then increasing homeschool visibility within the Latino community, the homeschool clinic has also began to work in increasing ESA awareness in the state of Arizona and also, as of recently, nationwide. So I am beginning to work through the homeschool clinic with homeschool leaders in other states who have concerns about what ESA might look like. And since I happen to be in this great state where we're ahead of it a little bit, I'm able to share I had those same concerns too, but this is a great opportunity for your state. And here's why. And this is definitely something I never thought I would say. You were not going to catch me supporting ESA publicly just a few years ago. But I have seen the difference, and my children, just anecdotal, right? We are so much better off. I want everyone who has financial concerns, who thinks that they're not able to afford it. I want every homeschooling family that wants to homeschool, I want them to be able to have what we have.
My last question for you is, what big projects are you most excited about now?
What I'm most excited about is the book that I am working on, where I kind of take a lot of what I've shared with you and actually have it written for posterity. Latino homeschooling has the possibility to raise up leaders and to raise up an entire generation of incredible people. For a long time, I was doing the work and listening to what other people were doing, and I realized this is history. We are living through history right now. No one is writing this down. No one is keeping a record of it. And thus, my idea for a book. First, as a letter to my girls, and second, as encouragement to those in the Latino homeschooling community. And the third purpose would be to record the Latino homeschooling movement.
Thank you for sharing with us this forthcoming book. I think as soon as you are ready to release it, you have to let us know.
And I'm going to be sending a copy directly to your house for feedback before anyone else reads it.
I will bring out my red pen. I won't be shy.
Oof, I'm scared.
Is there anything that you didn't get an opportunity to share that you'd like to share?
The first thing is thank you so much, Christy, for creating a space where you are willing to have a dialogue. The second thing is that I would encourage all homeschooling people to gather together and begin to have these discussions. What is education for our people group? What is it that is strong about our people group? Whose shoulders do we stand on? These are questions that are very important. What is strong about our group, our community, as opposed to what is wrong with our community? So finding the strengths. What do we believe in? What do we owe our ancestors? Those are some questions that I think every group needs to sit down and reflect on. I think that's important as we grow in numbers just across the homeschooling community. There are so many things to do within the homeschooling community and so few leaders. And so my plea is, if you feel any sort of stirring that you might be that person being called to stand up for your community and for your people, it's probably you.
That's a great way to end. Brenda, thank you so much for your time. And I look forward to receiving that copy, watching your community grow. And thank you so much.
Well, Christy, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks for joining us for an episode of Homeschool Connections. For more resources, research, and data, connect with us on social media at JHU Homeschool or visit us online at education.jhu.edu/edpolicy, where you can click through to explore the Homeschool Hub and scroll down to sign up for our newsletter. If today's episode sparked ideas or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, I'm Christy Batts with the Johns Hopkins Homeschool Research Lab.